Chapter 1. Arrival at the Grand Hotel. The train from Paris slowed with a sigh of steam and brakes, as though even the mighty Sud Express was reluctant to disturb the perfection of the Côte d'Azur in late spring. Hercule Poirot stepped down onto the little platform at Beaulieu-sur-Mer, adjusted the brim of his immaculate Homburg, and inhaled the warm, salt-laden air scented with mimosa and pine. For once, the famous Belgian detective had no appointment with murder. His doctor had been most firm. Complete rest, no newspapers, no telegrams, no little problems for at least a fortnight. Poirot had therefore chosen the Grand Hotel, that white palace perched above the sea between Nice and Monte Carlo, where the rich came to be seen and the discreet came to disappear. A liveried porter in pale blue and gold hurried forward. "Monsieur Poirot, the automobile is waiting." Poirot surrendered his valise, containing, among other essentials, 3 pairs of patent leather shoes and a small tin of crème métamorphose for the moustache, and allowed himself to be driven the short, winding distance up the hill. As the open touring car rounded the final bend, the hotel revealed itself in all its Belle Époque splendor. Terraces cascading toward the Mediterranean, a dome the color of fresh butter, and 200 windows glittering like watchful eyes. In the marble entrance hall, cooled by slow-turning punkahs, the manager himself awaited with bows and murmured compliments. "We are honored, Monsieur Poirot. Suite 312, Sea View, as requested. And may I say how peaceful it is this week? Only the most refined guests." Poirot inclined his head with exquisite politeness. Peaceful, the word tasted suspicious on his tongue, but he only smiled. The lift, an ornate cage of brass and mahogany, carried him smoothly to the 3rd floor. When the door of Suite 312 closed behind him, Poirot removed his hat, placed it on the stand with geometrical precision, and walked out onto the balcony. Far below, the sea was a sheet of hammered turquoise. A white yacht drifted like a lazy swan. Somewhere, a band was playing a soft, sentimental waltz. For a moment, Hercule Poirot felt almost relaxed. That feeling lasted exactly 7 minutes. He had descended to the terrace for a sirop de grenadine when he became aware of the people around him. The Grand Hotel attracted a very particular species. Those who possessed money older than the century, and those who possessed money newer than the week. Both kinds watched each other with the wary fascination of cats. At the table nearest the balustrade sat Sir Henry Marsden, the English industrialist whose shipyards had armed half the navies of Europe during the war. He was a thick-set man of 60, with a face like a suspicious bulldog, and a voice that carried the clang of rivets. Beside him, pale and languid, was his much younger wife, Lady Eleanor, once a celebrated beauty of the London stage, now wrapped in boredom and pearls. 2 tables away, the Contessa di Ferraro sipped a martini with the concentration of a priestess at an altar. She was perhaps 45, but the kind of 45 that costs a great deal of money to achieve. Her black hair was drawn back severely, emphasizing cheekbones sharp enough to slice prosciutto. A ruby of scandalous size glowed at her throat. Closer to Poirot, an American couple argued in expensive undertones. Mr. Jeremiah P. Blackstone, Oil and Railways, had the loud waistcoats and louder opinions of his tribe. His daughter, Miss Daisy Blackstone, was a bright modern girl of 22 with bobbed bronze hair and a laugh like breaking glass. She wore a sailor suit that had cost more than most sailors earned in a year, and smoked cigarettes in a jade holder with defiant nonchalance. At a corner table, almost invisible, sat a thin young man in clerical black, the Abbé Lafarge, reading his breviary with downcast eyes. Yet Poirot, whose gaze missed nothing, noticed that the abbé's attention was not on the Latin text, but on the movements of the other guests, especially the Contessa. The final player arrived late, sweeping through the French windows as though entering a stage. Madame Véronique Valois, queen of the Paris couture houses, still beautiful at 50, with silver-streaked auburn hair and the posture of an empress. She was accompanied by her secretary, a colourless young woman named Mademoiselle Gray, who carried notebooks the way other people carry rosaries. Poirot sipped his grenadine and catalogued them all in the tidy filing system of his mind. It was a habit he could not break, even on holiday. The doctor had forbidden work, not observation. Dinner that evening was announced by a soft gong. The dining room, all gilded plaster and crystal chandeliers, shimmered like the inside of a Fabergé egg. Poirot was placed at a small table near the window. From here he could observe the larger table where Sir Henry held court. The industrialist was in full voice. "Mark my words, the fellow was asking for trouble. Flaunting that collection of his, the Star of the East alone is worth a king's ransom." Lady Eleanor toyed with her oysters. "Darling, must we talk jewellery at dinner? It's so vulgar." "Vulgar?" Sir Henry barked a laugh. "My dear, the Star of the East is a 127-carat sapphire that once belonging to Catherine the Great. Vulgar doesn't come into it." The Contessa di Ferraro leaned forward, her ruby catching the candlelight like a drop of fresh blood. "You are mistaken, Sir Henry. The stone was originally Muggle. Catherine merely borrowed it." Her English was perfect, but the accent a whisper of Venice and Vienna. Mr. Blackstone slapped the table. "Muggle, Russian, Hottentot, what does it matter? The point is, a man who carries $500,000 in gems in his luggage is either a fool or inviting murder." Miss Daisy blew a perfect smoke ring. "Daddy, you're being dramatic. Mr. Vandenberg is simply eccentric. All Dutch diamond merchants are." At the name Vandenberg, Poirot's ears pricked. Peter Vandenberg, the Amsterdam dealer, was indeed staying at the hotel. Poirot had noticed him earlier. A small, bald man with the bright, hard eyes of a terrier, dining alone and constantly touching the breast pocket of his dinner jacket, as though reassuring himself that something precious was still there. The abbé crossed himself almost imperceptibly. Madame Valois laughed, a sound like champagne fizzing. "Eccentric! My dear child, the man sleeps with his jewels under his pillow. I saw his valet carrying the casket this afternoon. Black leather, gold clasps the size of a small suitcase." Sir Henry raised his glass. "To Mr. Vandenberg's continued good health, then. May he live long enough to pay his bill." There was polite laughter, but Poirot noticed that no one looked entirely comfortable. After dinner, the guests drifted toward the salon for coffee and liqueurs. Poirot lingered on the terrace, enjoying the night air. The moon hung low and full, silvering the sea. Somewhere below, waves murmured against the rocks like guilty secrets. He became aware of a presence at his elbow. It was Mademoiselle Gray, the secretary, clutching her notebook like a shield. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, "forgive the intrusion. Madame Valois asked me to give you this." She pressed a small folded card into his hand and vanished. Poirot opened it beneath a lantern. The message, in elegant violet ink, was brief. "If you are indeed the Hercule Poirot, I should very much like to consult you. Tomorrow, 11 o'clock, my suite. Do not mention this to anyone." Véronique Valois Poirot twirled his moustache thoughtfully. "Consultation? Already? He had been at the hotel less than 6 hours. He looked back toward the brightly lit windows. Inside, shadows moved, Sir Henry arguing with his wife, the Contessa watching the American girl with unreadable eyes, the Abbé standing motionless in a corner, like a black exclamation mark. Poirot sighed. It was, he reflected, going to be a most unrestful rest cure. Far out at sea, a yacht's riding light winked once, twice, then vanished into the darkness. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Lobby. Hercule Poirot awoke to the gentle percussion of waves, and the more insistent percussion of his own curiosity. Sunlight, filtered through lace curtains, painted pale arabesques across the counterpane. For a full 30 seconds, he considered obeying his doctor and his doctor's orders. Breakfast in bed, a day of indolent nothing. Then he remembered Madame Valois' violet-scented note, and the small, almost invisible tremor in Mademoiselle Gray's hand as she delivered it. He rose, performed his morning toilette with the solemnity of a religious rite, the moustache waxed to razor symmetry, shoes polished until they reflected the ceiling like dark mirrors, and descended to the lobby at precisely 9:30. The Séchigot Grand Hotel's lobby was a cathedral of marble and murmuring money. Palms in Sèvres pots soared toward a painted dome, where nymphs disported themselves among improbable clouds. Morning light poured through stained glass panels, scattering peacock colours across the chessboard floor. Guests drifted like expensive fish in a gilded aquarium. Poirot chose a velvet banquette near the concierge's desk, ordered a café crème, and prepared to observe. The first ripple came at 10 minutes past 10. Mr. Peter van den Berg, the Dutch diamond merchant, appeared at the top of the grand staircase. He was even smaller than Poirot remembered, a bald pink gnome in a light grey suit that looked as though it had been tailored for someone larger. In his left hand he clutched the black leather casket Madame Valois had described. He glanced left, right, behind, then scuttled toward the lift, as though pursued by invisible assassins. The lift boy, a cheeky youth with brilliantined hair, later confided to a chambermaid, who later confided to the sommelier, who later confided to half the staff, that Mr. van den Berg had barked, "Top floor, and hurry, garçon, I have enemies." Poirot's moustache twitched. Enemies, always an interesting word before noon. At 10:20, Sir Henry Marsden marched through the lobby, trailing cigar smoke and indignation. He stopped at the concierge's desk and demanded, in a voice that rattled the palm fronds, "I want every newspaper from Paris, London, and New York. And tell that idiot porter, if my golf clubs aren't on the first tee by 11, I'll have him deported." Lady Eleanor followed at a distance, yawning behind violet gloves. She paused to examine a display of Lalique glass, then drifted toward the terrace where Miss Daisy Blackstone was already holding court among a cluster of sunburned young men in white flannels. The Contessa appeared next, descending the staircase with the slow majesty of a funeral gondola. She wore black again today, relieved only by the blood-bright ruby at her throat. She did not walk so much as glide, and every male head turned as though pulled by the same invisible string. She paused beside Poirot's table. "Monsieur Poirot," she murmured in that smoky Venetian accent, "you are admiring our little theatre." "I am admiring the actors, madame. They are varied." Her smile was thin. "In a hotel such as this, everyone plays a part, some better than others." She touched the ruby lightly. "Some parts are worth killing for." Before Poirot could reply, she had moved on, leaving only a trace of jasmine and menace. At 10:35, a minor commotion erupted near the revolving doors. A porter staggered in under the weight of an enormous trunk plastered with labels: Cairo, Bombay, Singapore, Valparaiso." Behind it came a newcomer, tall, bronzed, perhaps 35, with the easy shoulders of a man who has never carried anything heavier than a polo mallet. He wore a linen suit, the colour of fresh cream, and a smile that suggested the world had been created for his personal amusement. The concierge fluttered forward. "Captain Desmond Payne, I presume. Your suite is ready." Payne tossed him a tip large enough to choke a horse. "Splendid. And do send up a bottle of the 15 Pol Roger. I feel celebratory." Poirot filed the name. Captain Desmond Payne, late of His Majesty's Indian Army, retired under something of a cloud after an incident involving regimental silver and a Maharaja's wife. The cloud had apparently been lucrative. At 11 o'clock precisely, Poirot presented himself at Madame Valois' suite on the second floor. Mademoiselle Gray opened the door as though she had been standing behind it for hours. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "Madame is indisposed," she whispered, "but she will see you." Indisposed was not the word Poirot would have chosen. Madame Valois reclined on a chaise-longue in a peignoir of midnight blue silk, her famous auburn hair loose about her shoulders. A half-empty glass of absinthe stood on the table beside her, its colour unnaturally green in the sunlight. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, voice husky, "thank heavens, I am being blackmailed." She did not wait for him to sit. "3 days ago in Paris I received this." She handed him a single sheet of cheap paper. The message was typed. "You know what you did in 1919. The price of silence is 200,000 francs. Deliver the money to the bearer at the Grand Hotel Beaulieu on the 15th. Come alone, or the newspapers will know everything. A friend." Poirot turned the paper over. No watermark, common typewriter, posted in Monte Carlo 2 days earlier. "And what," he asked gently, "happened in 1919, madame?" Her hand trembled as she reached for the absinthe. "A foolishness. A married diplomat. A duel that was hushed up. His wife took her own life. I was implicated." Poirot's eyes were very green. "And you believe the blackmailer is here, in this hotel?" "I am certain of it. Last night someone tried my door after midnight, and this morning—" She opened a drawer and produced a single red rose, its petals bruised and dying. Tied to the stem with black ribbon was a card. On it, in the same typed letters, "Tick-tock, Veronique." Poirot examined the rose, the ribbon, the card. Then he looked at Mademoiselle Gray, who stood twisting her handkerchief into knots. "You saw who left this?" The secretary shook her head violently. "It was on the breakfast tray when room service brought it at 8. The waiter swears he knows nothing." Poirot twirled his moustache. "Madam, you will permit me to keep these items? And you will speak of this to no one, not even your faithful Mademoiselle Gray." Madame Valois clutched his hand. "You will help me. I am on holiday," Poirot said regretfully, "but yes, I will help you." He left the suite deep in thought. In the corridor, he almost collided with the Abbé Lafarge, who was hurrying past with a breviary pressed to his chest like a shield. "Pardon, mon père." The priest's pale eyes flicked up, startled. "Not at all, monsieur. A beautiful morning, is it not?" His fingers, Poirot noticed, were stained with fresh ink. Back in the lobby, the whispers had grown louder. A knot of guests surrounded the concierge. Sir Henry's voice boomed above the rest. "What do you mean Vandenberg's casket has gone missing? The man only went up to his room an hour ago." The concierge wrung his hands. "He returned to the desk in a state, monsieur. Said he had been robbed. The casket was there one moment, gone the next. He's with the manager now, threatening to call the Sûreté." Poirot moved closer. Mr. Vandenberg stood in the centre of the commotion, pink-faced and apoplectic, waving his arms like a windmill. "It was there! I swear it. I put it in the wardrobe myself while I telephoned Amsterdam. When I turned round, poof, vanished. Was the door locked?" someone asked. "Of course it was locked. I have the only key here." He brandished a Yale key triumphantly, then looked vaguely confused, as though the key's existence undermined his story. Poirot slipped away before he could be drawn in. He had seen something more interesting. Captain Payne, lounging against a pillar, watching the drama with lazy amusement. And in his buttonhole, a fresh red rose that exactly matched the bruised bloom now in Poirot's pocket. From an upper balcony came the sound of a woman laughing. Miss Daisy Blackstone, bright and careless as birdsong. Somewhere a clock struck 12. Poirot returned to his banquette and ordered another café crème. The lobby swirled around him like a kaleidoscope of motives and secrets. He thought, "It is not yet early, but already the little grey cells, they begin to stir." Chapter 3. The Gala Night. The Grand Hotel's gala was announced for 9 o'clock, but the real performance began at sunset. From his balcony, Poirot watched the transformation. Lanterns of coloured glass were hung along the terraces, turning the white facade into a necklace of rubies, sapphires, and emeralds. The orchestra tuned up beneath a canopy of stars. Waiters in powdered wigs glided across the lawns with silver trays of champagne coupes so cold they smoked. The air smelled of tuberose, sea salt, and money. Poirot dressed with particular care. Midnight blue dinner jacket, waistcoat embroidered with tiny silver fleur-de-lis, the thinnest possible black tie. The patent leather pumps shone like obsidian. He paused before the mirror, gave the moustache a final, approving twitch, and murmured, "Tonight, Hercule Poirot, you are magnificent." At 8:45, he descended the grand staircase. The lobby had become a river of silk and diamonds. Women floated past in gowns the colours of sunrise and midnight. Men looked at, looked away, looked again. The men were less interesting, except Captain Desmond Payne, who had somehow acquired a white mess jacket with decorations that Poirot suspected had never been officially awarded. The orchestra struck up a slow, seductive tango. Couples drifted onto the marble floor that had been waxed to the slipperiness of ice. Poirot accepted a glass of champagne, Veuve Clicquot, 1911, excellent, and took up a position beside a potted palm that gave him a perfect view of the entire terrace. Sir Henry Marston arrived late and loud, his wife on his arm like a bored lily. Lady Eleanor wore silver lamé that clung like liquid moonlight. The famous Marsden diamonds flashed at throat and ears. Sir Henry's own studs were black pearls the size of hazelnuts. They moved through the crowd, leaving a wake of bows and nervous smiles. Next came the Contessa di Ferraro in a gown of black velvet so severe it looked funereal, except for the ruby pendant that throbbed like a heart between her breasts. She did not dance. She stood at the balustrade, staring out at the dark sea as though waiting for a ship that would never return. Mr. Vandenberg appeared, still pink with indignation over his stolen casket. He had replaced it with a bulging Morocco leather briefcase, which he clutched to his chest like a baby. Every few minutes he patted it and glared suspiciously at anyone who came within 3 meters. Miss Daisy Blackstone arrived in a scandalously short dress of gold fringe that flashed when she moved. She was surrounded instantly by young men begging for dances. She laughed, spun, allowed herself to be led away by Captain Payne, who moved with the lazy grace of a panther. Madame Valois made her entrance last, as great ladies always do. She wore a gown of deep violet chiffon layered like petals, and around her neck the famous Valois sapphires, 7 stones, each as large as a thumbnail, glowing with cold blue fire. Mademoiselle Grey hovered behind her in mouse grey, eyes darting nervously. The orchestra slid into a waltz. Poirot watched the patterns form and dissolve. Sir Henry danced with his wife once, stiffly, then abandoned her for the bar. Lady Eleanor was immediately claimed by Captain Payne, who steered her with insulting expertise. She laughed up at him, a sound like breaking crystal. Miss Daisy danced with a succession of partners, growing flushed and bright-eyed. At one point, she spun past Poirot and whispered breathlessly, "Isn't this divine? I could dance till dawn." Mr. Vandenberg refused all invitations to dance. He sat at a small table, the briefcase on his knees, drinking schnapps and muttering in Dutch. The Contessa remained at the balustrade. Once, Poirot saw the Abbé Lafarge approach her, speak softly, and retreat when she turned her back with icy finality. At 11, the orchestra paused. The hotel manager appeared with a flourish and announced that fireworks would begin in 15 minutes from the private jetty. Guests drifted down the stone steps toward the Gueug, sea champagne glasses in hand. Poirot followed at a discreet distance. The jetty was lit by torches. Beyond it, the yacht that had winked its lights the night before now lay at anchor, a dark silhouette against the stars. Rockets soared, burst into chrysanthemums of green and gold. The crowd sighed in pleasure. In the display, Poirot noticed small dramas unfolding. Captain Payne and Lady Eleanor had slipped away from the main group. They stood at the very end of the jetty, heads close together. Even at a distance, Poirot could see the glint of her diamonds and the white flash of his smile. Near the torchlight, Miss Daisy was arguing with her father. Mr. Blackstone's face was purple. He kept pointing toward Payne and Lady Eleanor. Daisy stamped a gold-slippered foot and flounced away. Madame Valois stood alone, the sapphires at her throat catching every explosion of coloured fire. Mademoiselle Grey was nowhere to be seen. Mr. Vandenberg had stationed himself beside the gangway to the yacht, briefcase still clutched tight. He appeared to be negotiating with a sailor in a striped jersey. The Contessa had vanished entirely. Poirot moved among the guests like a polite shadow, listening. "Heard Vandenberg's jewels never left his at all," a woman's voice floated past. "Mortgage to the hilt in Amsterdam. Eleanor Marsden's been seen leaving Payne's suite at dawn. Valois woman paid a fortune to hush up that business in 19, but someone still knows." A final rocket burst into a dazzling white star that slowly faded. The orchestra began to play again, this time a foxtrot. Couples hurried back up the steps. Poirot lingered. Something nagged at him. The sense that a piece of the puzzle had brushed past and he had failed to grasp it. He turned and almost walked into the Abbé Lafarge. "Forgive me, mon père." The priest's face was pale in the torchlight. "Not at all, monsieur. A splendid display, was it not?" His fingers were stained with ink again, and there was a small smear of red on his cuff. Lipstick, blood. Poirot smiled pleasantly. "Magnificent, though I confess I find human fireworks even more illuminating." The abbé flinched as though struck. Before Poirot could pursue the reaction, a scream shattered the night. It came from the direction of the hotel, high and desperate, cut off almost immediately. Guests froze. Champagne glasses slipped from fingers and shattered on stone. Poirot was already moving, pushing through the crowd with surprising speed for so small a man. Behind him, he heard Sir Henry's bellow, Captain Payne's sharp command, women's nervous laughter that was half hysteria. He took the terrace steps 2 at a time. In the lighted lobby, Mademoiselle Grey stood alone, one hand pressed to her mouth, the other pointing toward the grand staircase. At the foot of the stairs lay the black leather jewel casket, wrenched open and empty. Scattered across the marble, like drops of frozen blood, were a dozen loose rubies, glittering coldly under the chandeliers. And halfway up the staircase, slumped against the banister, as though bowing to an unseen audience, was Mr. Peter Vandenberg. His eyes were wide and staring. His mouth was open in a soundless scream. From the corner of his lips, a thin trickle of foam, white and glistening, traced a path to his chin. Poirot reached him first. He touched the man's wrist, felt nothing, then gently closed the staring eyes. Above the body, pinned to the velvet wall by a small pearl-handled dagger, fluttered a single sheet of paper. On it, in neat typed letters, were the words, "The first act ends. The second will be deadlier." A friend. The orchestra, unaware, continued to play a jaunty foxtrot. Poirot looked slowly around the circle of shocked faces that pressed closer. Somewhere among them, he knew, the curtain had just risen on murder. Chapter 4. The Shocking Discovery. The orchestra faltered, missed a beat, then died into silence as though someone had strangled it. Poirot stood motionless on the half-landing, one small hand resting on the carved mahogany, the other pressed to his temple. The lobby below had become a tableau vivant of horror. Chandeliers blazing, scattered rubies glowing like fresh wounds. And at the centre, the small, crumpled body of Peter Vandenberg. Captain Payne was the first to recover his voice. "Stand back, everyone! Give the man air!" He took the stairs 3 at a time, Lady Eleanor clinging to his arm, her silver gown now looking like armour in the harsh light. Sir Henry Marsden pushed forward, face crimson. "Good God, is he dead?" Poirot did not answer at once. He knelt, careful not to disturb the body more than necessary, and studied the signs with clinical calm. The pupils were pinpricks, the jaw slack, the skin already cooling. A faint bitter almond odour rose from the half-open mouth. "Dead? Yes," Poirot said quietly. "Cyanide, I believe. Very rapid. He has been gone perhaps 6, maybe 7 minutes." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Someone began to sob. Mademoiselle Grey swayed and would have fallen if Madame Valois had not caught her. The couturier's face was chalk beneath her rouge, but her eyes were steady. Someone shouted for the manager. The man arrived at a run, wig askew, night porter, and 2 waiters at his heels. "Telephone the police at once," Poirot ordered in a voice that brooked no argument. "And the doctor, Dr. Lefebvre, I think, is resident this week." "Good. No one is to leave the hotel. The gates must be closed. You understand?" The manager nodded dumbly and fled to obey. Poirot turned to the guests. "Mesdames et messieurs, it is regrettable, but I must ask you all to remain in the salon until the police arrive. Captain Payne, Sir Henry, perhaps you would assist in ensuring no one wanders off." The 2 men, for once in agreement, moved to block the exits. Poirot beckoned the knight. "Porter, did you see anyone come down the staircase in the last quarter hour?" The man, still in his shirt-sleeves, shook his head. "No one, monsieur. I was at the desk the whole time. The only person who passed was Mr. Vandenberg himself, hurrying up about 20 minutes ago, muttering that he had forgotten something in his room. And no one followed? Not that I saw." Poirot dismissed him with a nod, and began a slow ascent to the first floor, eyes sweeping every step. On the 7th stair, he paused. A single ruby, smaller than the others, lay winking in a corner. He picked it up with a silk handkerchief and slipped it into his waistcoat pocket. At the turn of the landing, he found the pearl-handled dagger still quivering in the velvet. The blade was thin, triangular, unmistakably feminine. The note remained pinned beneath it. The first act ends. The second will be deadlier. A friend, Poirot, unpinned the paper carefully, folded it, and placed it beside the ruby. Then he continued upward to Vandenberg's suite, room 217, whose door stood ajar. The room had been ransacked with methodical violence. Drawers yanked out, mattress slashed, the wardrobe hanging open like a gutted animal. On the dressing table lay a shattered glass. The carpet beneath it was dark and wet with spilt liquor. The bitter almond smell was stronger here. Poirot's gaze moved to the window. It was closed, but the catch showed fresh scratches. He opened it. A narrow balcony ran the length of the facade. From it, a determined person could reach the fire escape that zigzagged down to the gardens. He closed the window again and turned as Dr. Lefebvre arrived, breathless, medical bag in hand. The doctor confirmed what Poirot already knew. Instantaneous death by prussic acid, probably in the Geneva Vandenberg favoured. Self-administered? The doctor asked doubtfully. Unlikely, Poirot replied. Observe the angle of the head, the absence of a container in the hand. No, someone held the glass to his lips or forced him to drink. While the doctor made his preliminary notes, Poirot continued his examination. Beneath the overturned bedside table, he found a torn fragment of black ribbon, identical to the ribbon that had bound Madame Valois' threatening rose. And wedged behind the radiator, almost invisible, a single long black glove, perfumed faintly with jasmine, the Contessa di Ferraro's perfume. Poirot's eyes narrowed to green slits. Downstairs, the police had arrived. Inspector Bastien of the Sûreté from Nice, a tall, melancholy Provençal with a moustache almost the equal of Poirot's own. He listened gravely while Poirot gave a concise account, then sealed the staircase and posted constables at every exit. By 2 a.m, the lobby had been cleared of guests. Vandenberg's body lay in the cold room awaiting the van from the morgue. The scattered jewels had been gathered into an envelope. 17 rubies, 3 small diamonds, and the famous star of the East sapphire, conspicuously absent. Bastien rubbed tired eyes. You are certain, monsieur, that this is murder? Certain? The note, the ransacking, the missing sapphire? Classic mise en scène. Our killer wishes us to believe simple robbery. But robbery does not type neat little threats, nor does it scatter jewels like rose petals. Bastien sighed. Then we begin with the guests. All of them. All of them, Poirot agreed, though some will be more interesting than others. He glanced toward the salon doors. Through the glass he could see the survivors huddled in small groups. Sir Henry pouring brandy with a shaking hand, Lady Eleanor death pale, Captain Payne lighting one cigarette from another, Miss Daisy weeping quietly on her father's shoulder. The Contessa sat apart, gloved hands folded, face unreadable. Madame Valois smoked a cigarette in a jade holder, eyes fixed on nothing. The Abbé knelt in a corner, rosary clicking softly, and Mademoiselle Gray was missing. Poirot's brow creased. Inspector, have we a complete list? Bastien consulted his notebook. Everyone except the English secretary. She was seen running toward the gardens after the scream. My men are searching. Poirot's expression grew grimmer. Then let us hope they search quickly, because if I am not mistaken, the second act has already begun. Far out at sea, the yacht that had watched the fireworks slipped its anchor and moved silently into the darkness, running without lights. In the deserted lobby, the great chandelier flickered once, as though someone unseen had passed beneath it, then burned steady again. Chapter 5. Suspects and Alibis. The small writing room of the Grand Hotel had been turned into an interrogation chamber. One long table, 3 hard chairs, a single green-shaded lamp that threw a circle of harsh light onto faces already pale with shock and sleeplessness. Outside, dawn crept over the sea like a guilty thing. Inspector Bastien sat on one side of the table, notebook open, fountain pen poised. Poirot stood behind him, small and immaculate despite the hour, hands clasped behind his back, eyes glittering. They began at 6:15. First came the staff, night porter, lift boy, chambermaids. All swore they had seen nothing unusual after the fireworks except Mr. Vandenberg, hurrying upstairs alone. The night porter repeated that no one had followed. Poirot listened, nodded, dismissed them. At 6:40, the guests were summoned one by one. Sir Henry Marsden arrived in shirt-sleeves and fury. "This is bloody outrageous, dragging a man out of bed because some Dutch jeweller can't hold his liquor." Bastien waited until the baronet sat. "Where were you, Sir Henry, between 11:30 and midnight?" "On the terrace, with the rest of the civilized world watching fireworks." "Then in the bar, having a nightcap with Blackstone and half a dozen others. Ask them." Poirot murmured, "We shall." "And after you left the bar?" "Came straight to bed. My wife can confirm." Lady Eleanor, when she appeared 10 minutes later, wrapped in a sable coat over her nightgown, did confirm it, though her eyes were red and her voice brittle. "He came in at 12:30, cursing about foreigners and bad brandy. I was awake. I heard the clock strike." She left without looking at Poirot. Mr. Jeremiah P. Blackstone stomped in next, chewing an unlit cigar. "Whole thing's a damned disgrace. Vandenberg was insured up to his eyeballs. Lloyd's of London will pay for every stone. Mark my words, he arranged the whole thing himself, and is halfway to South America by now." "And you, monsieur?" Poirot asked gently. "Me? I was arguing with my fool daughter about that bounder pane. She stormed off. I went to the card room, lost 50 louis at baccarat to Captain Payne and Colonel Masterson. They'll tell you. Came to bed around 1. Miss Daisy Blackstone confirmed the argument, but claimed she had gone straight to her room afterward, alone. No one had seen her enter. Captain Desmond Payne was next. He strolled in looking as fresh as if he had slept 10 hours, white mess jacket still immaculate. "Fearfully sorry about the Dutchman," he said lightly. "Bad show. As for me, after the fireworks, I escorted Lady Eleanor back to the terrace for a breath of air. We may have lingered, then cards with Blackstone and the Colonel until 1-ish. After that, my room. Alone, I'm afraid. No witnesses." He smiled the lazy, disarming smile that had ruined more reputations than Poirot could count. Madame Véronique Valois entered like a tragedy queen, the sapphires replaced by a single black cross. She sat without being asked. "I was on the upper terrace the entire time," she said. "Mademoiselle Gray was with me until the scream. Then she ran toward the hotel. I followed more slowly. By the time I reached the lobby, you were already there, monsieur." "And the threatening letters you showed me yesterday?" Poirot asked softly. Her hand flew to her throat. "You think they are connected?" "I think everything is connected, madame." She hesitated. Then, the handwriting on the note pinned to the wall, "It is the same typewriter. I recognized the broken E." Bastien made a note. The Contessa de Ferraro arrived last of the principal guests, moving with the same glacial calm she had shown all night. She laid her long black gloves on the table before sitting. One glove was missing its pair. "After the fireworks," she said in her low, accented voice, "I walked in the gardens, alone. I often find crowds oppressive." I returned through the side entrance at approximately 12:20. I saw no one on the staircase. Poirot's gaze fell on her gloved hands. "Yet you were seen, madame, earlier in the evening, speaking to the abbé." A flicker crossed her perfect face. "A confession of childhood sins, nothing more." The abbé himself came next, pale and trembling slightly. His alibi was the weakest of all. I remained in the chapel after the fireworks, praying for the souls of the departed. The chapel is at the far end of the east wing. I heard nothing until the scream. Then I ran. Poirot studied the ink stains on the priest's fingers. The faint smear of red on his cuff that had not been lipstick after all. "Mon père, did you write letters last night?" The abbé's eyes widened. "Only my journal, a habit of many years. May we see it?" He hesitated, then produced a small black notebook from his pocket. The latest entry was dated yesterday. The ink was still faintly wet. Bastien took the book, flipped pages, stopped. Tucked between two leaves was a single sheet of cheap paper, identical to the blackmail notes and the warning pinned to the staircase wall. The abbé went white. I found it on the chapel floor this morning. I meant to give it to the police." Poirot took the sheet. Typed, like the others, "The priest knows too much." Silence him next. The room seemed to contract. At 8:30, Mademoiselle Gray was finally brought in, escorted by two gendarmes. She was barefoot, her dress torn and stained with grass, hair wild. She had been found curled beneath a cypress in the lower garden, half fainting. She could barely speak at first. When she did, her voice was a thread. "I saw him," she whispered, "on the staircase, a man in evening dress. He was bending over Mr. Vandenberg. When he heard me, he ran upward, toward the roof. I screamed. Then I was so frightened. I ran outside. Did you recognize the man?" Bastien pressed. She shook her head violently. "It was dark, only a silhouette." Poirot leaned forward. "Mademoiselle, think carefully. Was there anything at all, that distinguished him? A flower in the buttonhole, perhaps?" Her eyes widened. "Yes, a red rose, fresh, like the one Captain Payne was wearing." Captain Payne, when recalled, merely laughed. "Half the men here had roses in their buttonholes last night, old boy. Compliments of the management." But the seed was planted. By 9 o'clock the alibis lay on the table like a hand of cards, none of them perfect, all of them flawed. Poirot gathered the papers together and tapped them into a neat stack. "Observe, Inspector," he said quietly. "Everyone has a reason to lie, and everyone has a fragment of truth. But one person has arranged the fragments so that the picture is false." He looked toward the window, where pale morning light now flooded the terrace. "Tonight," he said, "we will force the picture to reveal itself." Bastien raised an eyebrow. "How?" Poirot smiled, a small, dangerous smile. "By giving the murderer exactly what he or she most desires, the star of the East Sapphire, apparently unguarded, and a second chance to kill." Outside, the hotel flag was lowered to half-mast. Inside, the guests gathered in frightened knots, watching one another with new, wary eyes. And somewhere in the echoing corridors, a typewriter waited for the next message. Chapter 6. Secrets of the Past. The storm arrived at 4 in the afternoon, sudden and theatrical, as only Mediterranean storms can be. One moment, the sky was a hard, glittering blue. The next, black clouds boiled over the Alps, and the sea turned the color of gunmetal. Thunder cracked like artillery rolled across the bay. Rain lashed the hotel windows in sheets. Inside the Grand Hotel, every shutter was closed, every lamp lit early. The atmosphere was that of a beautiful ship that has struck a hidden reef and is slowly, elegantly beginning to sink. Poirot had asked for and received the use of the hotel's small library, oak-panelled, smelling of old leather and beeswax. He sat at the long table surrounded by the evidence so far, the blackmail letters, the torn black ribbon, the single ruby, the pearl-handled dagger, the page from the Abbé's journal. Inspector Bastien had gone to Nice to send telegrams and to fetch a fingerprint expert. The guests had been told, politely but firmly, to remain in their rooms until dinner. Poirot worked alone. He spread the 3 typed messages side by side. "You know what you did in 1919. Tick-tock, Veronique. The first act ends." All typed on the same machine. A portable Remington with a broken lowercase e and a slightly raised t. The paper was cheap, sold in every stationer's from Marseille to Menton. Useless, but the words themselves, those were not useless. He took a fresh sheet and began to write, in his small, precise hand, everything that had happened in 1919. Armistice only months old. Europe still bleeding. Paris full of uniforms and grief and desperate gaiety. A certain Austrian diplomat, Count Stephan von Ritter, attached to the peace delegation. Married to a fragile Frenchwoman named Claire de Montfort. A scandalous affair with the rising young couturière Véronique Valois. A duel in the Bois de Boulogne at dawn. The Count wounded, Claire found dead in the Seine 2 days later. Officially suicide, unofficially murder by despair. The scandal hushed by influence and money. Véronique Valois fled to New York, returned 5 years later, richer and colder. Poirot underlined one name twice, Claire de Montfort. Then he opened the hotel register for the past week and ran a manicured finger down the page. There, room 204. Signed in a spidery continental hand, Contessa Maria di Ferraro, née de Montfort. He sat back, eyes shining. So, the sister. The storm rattled the windows like an impatient visitor. At 6 o'clock, Poirot summoned Madame Valois and the Contessa to the library. They arrived first, composed, the black cross still at her throat. The Contessa followed minutes later, moving like a woman walking to her own execution. Poirot did not ask them to sit. "Mesdames," he began softly, "it is time to stop pretending. You knew each other before this week, did you not?" Madame Valois lifted her chin. "I have never seen this woman in my life." The Contessa's laugh was low and bitter. "Liar! You saw me every time you looked in a mirror and remembered my sister's face at the bottom of the river." Madame Valois went very white. Poirot raised a hand. "Silence, I pray you. Contessa, you came here for vengeance, yes? The letters, the rose, the ribbon, all your work." The Contessa's eyes blazed. "Yes, I wanted her to feel fear the way Claire felt fear. I wanted her to know someone remembered." "But you did not kill Vandenberg." "No." The word was flat, exhausted. "Though I wish I had thought of it." Poirot turned to Madame Valois. "And you, madame, believed the Contessa had come to kill you. That is why you consulted me. But the murderer used your old scandal as camouflage. Clever, very clever." He dismissed them both with a small bow. At 7, he interviewed the abbé in the chapel. The little priest was lighting candles against the storm. Their flames shook in the draught. "Mon père," Poirot said gently, "you knew Claire de Montfort also, I think." The abbé's hand jerked. Wax spattered. She came to me for confession in Paris, the week before she died. She was tormented. She spoke of ending her life. And you have carried that secret ever since." The abbé nodded miserably. "When I saw Madame Valois' name on the hotel register, and then the Contessa's. I did not know what to do. Last night someone left that note in the confessional. I thought perhaps the Contessa meant to kill again." Poirot patted his shoulder. "You are not the murderer, mon père. But you are the reason he chose this hotel." He left the chapel deep in thought. Dinner was a tense, silent affair. The great dining room felt cavernous with only 12 places set. Rain drummed on the glass dome overhead. Lightning illuminated the pale, watchful faces. Poirot had arranged the seating himself. Captain Payne opposite Lady Eleanor. Miss Daisy beside her father, who scowled at Payne every time he spoke. The Contessa at the far end, black-clad, magnificent in grief. Madame Valois beside Poirot, diamonds replaced by pearls of shame. Halfway through the fish course, the lights flickered and died. Women screamed. A glass shattered. When the emergency lamps came on seconds later, the Star of the East sapphire, Poirot had borrowed it from the police evidence envelope, lay in the centre of the table on a black velvet cloth, blazing cold blue fire. Poirot had placed it there deliberately. For a long second no one moved. Then Captain Payne laughed, a little too loudly. Someone's idea of a joke. But his hand, Poirot noticed, had gone instinctively to his inside breast pocket. After dinner, Poirot gathered them all in the salon and spoke with quiet authority. "Mesdames et messieurs, tomorrow morning the police will take statements again. But tonight I ask only one thing, that each of you write, in your own hand, a short account of where you were between 11:30 and midnight yesterday. Seal it, unsigned, and leave it on this tray. It is an experiment." They obeyed, some sullen, some curious, some frightened. At midnight, Poirot sat alone in the library with the 12 sealed envelopes and a magnifying glass. He opened them one by one. Sir Henry, blunt, angry scrawl. Lady Eleanor, looping, aristocratic hand. Mr. Blackstone, impatient capitals. Miss Daisy, large, schoolgirlish cursive. Captain Payne, elegant, slightly backward slope. Madame Valois, dramatic flourishes. The Contessa, small, precise, European. The Abbé, beautiful clerical Latin hand, and 4 envelopes containing pages typed on the hotel's public Remington in the writing room. The same broken E, the same raised T. 4 guests had chosen to type rather than write. Poirot lined the typed pages up and read them carefully. One account was different from the others. It placed its author on the upper terrace with Madame Valois at the exact moment Mademoiselle Gray claimed to have seen a man with a red rose on the staircase. The times did not match. Poirot rang the bell for the night porter. "Ask Mademoiselle Gray to come to the library, please, and tell Captain Payne his presence is required." While he waited, he took the pearl-handled dagger from its wrappings and laid it beside the sapphire. Lightning flashed. For an instant, the blade seemed to drip fresh blood. Then the door opened, and Mademoiselle Gray entered, pale, clutching a dressing-gown around her. "Monsieur Poirot." He smiled kindly. "Mademoiselle, you told us you saw only a silhouette. But you saw more, did you not? You recognized the man, and you have been afraid ever since." She began to tremble. "It is time," Poirot said gently, "to stop protecting him." Behind her the door opened again. Captain Payne stood on the threshold, raincoat over evening clothes, a small pistol in his hand. "Afraid she's right, old boy," he said almost apologetically. "Can't let her talk. Nothing personal." Thunder drowned the sound of the shot that never came. Poirot had moved with astonishing speed. The heavy library globe crashed down on Payne's wrist. The pistol clattered across the carpet. In the same moment, Inspector Bastien and 2 gendarmes appeared from the adjoining card-room where they had been waiting. Payne cursed, cradled his broken wrist and laughed. Short, bitter, finished. Poirot retrieved the pistol and looked at him almost with pity. "You should have stayed in India, mon capitaine. There at least the scandals were warmer." Outside, the storm began to move on, growling toward Italy. Inside, the sapphire caught the lamplight and threw a cold blue star across the wall, like an eye that had finally closed. Chapter 7. The Chicago Midnight Rendezvous. The storm had passed, but the night was still restless. Water dripped from the eaves in nervous, irregular beats. Somewhere a shutter banged like a warning. The hotel corridors, lit only by low emergency lamps, felt longer than they had any right to be. At 11:30, Poirot stood alone in the darkened ballroom. The chandeliers were off, the great mirrors blind. Moonlight, thin and silver after the rain, slid through the high windows and laid pale rectangles across the parquet. In the centre of the floor, on a small ebony pedestal that had once held a bust of Napoleon, now rested the Star of the East sapphire, alone, uncovered, blazing like a fallen comet. Poirot had arranged everything with theatrical precision. The sapphire had been returned to him that afternoon by Inspector Bastien. For bait, Poirot had said, and Bastien, after a long Provençal sigh, had agreed. Every exterior door except one had been locked and guarded. Every guest had been told, casually, that the famous stone would spend the night in the manager's safe. Only a handful knew the truth. Poirot himself wore soft-soled evening pumps and a black silk scarf that hid the white of his shirt front. He stood motionless beside a velvet curtain, breathing shallowly, the little beretta from Captain Payne's luggage now tucked into his waistcoat pocket. Midnight. The doors at the far end opened without a sound. A figure entered, tall, moving with the easy balance of an athlete. Moonlight caught the white mesh jacket, the bronze hair, the red rose still, incredibly, in the buttonhole. Captain Desmond Payne, wrist splintered and bandaged, but otherwise as elegant as ever. He did not see Poirot. His eyes were fixed on the sapphire. He crossed the floor in absolute silence, took a small chamois pouch from his pocket, and reached for the stone. "Touch it, mon capitaine," Poirot said softly from the shadows, "and you will never touch anything again." Payne froze. Slowly, he straightened and turned. "Damn you, Poirot." His voice was light, almost amused. "I thought you'd be asleep like a sensible little man." "I am never sensible when murder is abroad." Poirot stepped into the moonlight. "And you, Capitaine, are abroad far too often." Payne's good hand moved toward his pocket. "I wouldn't," Poirot warned. "The inspector and 3 gendarmes are behind the mirrors. The glass is one way tonight. Smile. You are surrounded." Payne glanced at the long mirrors lining the ballroom. In each, ghostly reflections of uniformed men glimmered. He let his hand fall. "Clever," he admitted Payne, "but you still have nothing. A man may admire a sapphire without wanting to steal it." True, but a man does not break his wrist, escape from a locked room, and return for a stone he has already failed to obtain unless that stone is the price of his life. Payne's smile thinned. Poirot continued, conversational. "You are in debt, Capitaine, deeply. The Maharaja's rubies you sold in Cairo were paste. The regimental silver you lost at Polo was melted down weeks earlier. Your creditors are no longer patient. One in particular, an Armenian gentleman in Marseille, has promised to send pieces of you home to your mother if the money is not repaid by the new moon. 500,000 francs, I believe." Payne said nothing. So, Poirot went on, "you come to the Grand Hotel, where you know Peter Van den Bergh will be staying with his famous jewels. You court Lady Eleanor for information. You flirt with Miss Daisy for cover. You lose just enough at cards to seem harmless. And you discover that Van den Bergh's collection is even larger than rumoured, and that he is careless. He brags, he drinks, he trusts the hotel safe that is no longer safe because you have seduced the night clerk's sister." Payne's jaw tightened. "The plan is simple," Poirot said. "Steal the jewels during the gala, make it look like an outside thief, disappear on the yacht waiting in the bay. But Van den Bergh surprises you in his room. You are forced to kill him, quickly with the cyanide you always carry for inconvenient creditors. You scatter a few lesser stones to suggest panic, pin your theatrical note to mislead, and escape across the balconies. Unfortunately, Mademoiselle Gray sees you. You must silence her later, but first the sapphire is still in the dead man's pocket, and the police have sealed the room." Payne gave a short, bitter laugh. "Very pretty, Poirot. But you said yourself the sapphire was in the evidence envelope. How could I know you would put it out like cheese for a mouse?" "Because I sent you a note," Poirot replied, producing a folded paper. "Delivered to your room an hour ago by a bellboy who does not exist." He read aloud, "The police are returning the star tonight. It will lie in the ballroom until morning. Come alone if you still want it. A friend." Payne stared at the typed note, at the familiar broken E, and for the first time his composure cracked. "You used the murderer's own machine," he whispered. "Exactement. The murderer is clever, but he is also vain. He could not resist signing his work, and vanity, Capitaine, is the one thing I can always count on." From the mirrors the gendarmes emerged. Payne did not resist when they took his arms. His face in the moonlight was suddenly tired, almost boyish. "Tell me one thing, Poirot," he said as they led him away. "Was it always me?" Poirot considered. "From the moment Mademoiselle Gray mentioned the red rose, yes. Only 3 men wore one that night. Sir Henry's was crushed by his wife during their dance. Mr. Blackstone's was white. Yours was fresh at 2 in the morning, long after the flowers had wilted on every other lapel. Someone had replaced it recently from the arrangement in the Contessa's suite. You passed her door on your way down from the roof." Payne shook his head, almost admiring. "You really are a little devil." "Non," Poirot corrected gently. "I am merely Belgian." The ballroom doors closed. The sapphire still burned on its pedestal, cold and triumphant. Poirot allowed himself one small sigh. He lifted the stone, slipped it into its chamois pouch, and started toward the door. Halfway there, he paused, turned back, and addressed the empty air. "You may come out now, mademoiselle." From behind a potted palm, Mademoiselle Gray emerged, trembling. I had to see," she whispered. "I was so afraid he would kill you." Poirot looked at her kindly. "He would not have killed me, but he would have killed you eventually, to keep his secret. You loved him, n'est-ce pas?" She began to cry soundlessly. Poirot offered his arm. "Come, a little brandy, and then bed. Tomorrow the sun will rise, the sea will be blue again, and you will discover that the heart is remarkably resilient." As they left the ballroom, the moon slid behind a cloud, and the sapphire's fierce light was suddenly extinguished, as though it too had finally had enough of human greed. In the corridor outside, waiting in the shadows, stood the Contessa di Ferraro. She watched them pass without a word, black veil over her face, the ruby at her throat dark as an old wound. Somewhere a clock struck 1. Poirot did not look back. Chapter 8. Twists and Deceptions. The following morning broke clear and mercilessly bright, as though the storm had scrubbed every shadow from the sky. At 9 o'clock the hotel guests gathered in the winter garden, an octagonal glass house filled with white lilies and the smell of wet earth. They sat in a stiff half-circle, the way people sit in a dentist's waiting room, pretending to read newspapers, pretending not to watch one another. Captain Payne had been taken to the Nice jail before dawn. The sapphire was locked in the manager's safe. By rights, the nightmare should have been over. Yet Poirot felt no satisfaction. He stood at the French windows, looking out over the terraces, hands clasped behind his back, moustache drooping with something very like gloom. Inspector Bastien approached, cap in hand. "Everything ties up, monsieur." Payne's cabin on the yacht was searched at sunrise. Black clothes, rope, a duplicate key to Vandenberg's suite, even a half-empty vial of prussic acid. And the Armenian moneylender in Marseille confirms the debt. It is finished. Poirot turned slowly. "No, mon ami, it is not finished. It is merely arranged." Bastien blinked. "Arranged? Observe." Poirot raised his voice so the whole winter garden could hear. "Mesdames et messieurs, last night Captain Payne attempted to steal the Star of the East. He has confessed to the murder of Peter Vandenberg. You may all return to your holidays with tranquil hearts." A murmur of relief rippled through the room. Sir Henry barked a triumphant laugh. Mr. Blackstone slapped his thigh. Miss Daisy burst into tears of pure nerves. Only 3 people did not move. Madame Valois sat very straight, gloved hands clenched in her lap. The Contessa di Ferraro stared at Poirot with black, unfathomable eyes, and the Abbé Lafarge crossed himself slowly, as though blessing a coffin. Poirot waited until the others began to drift away, then spoke again softly. Except, of course, that Captain Payne did not kill anyone. The winter garden froze. Sir Henry spun round. "What the devil?" Poirot raised a small hand. "Captain Payne is a thief, yes, a swindler, a dozen times over, but he is not a murderer. Last night he came for the sapphire because I lured him. He believed the murder charge would be dropped if he returned the stone. A desperate gamble, but then desperate men gamble." He walked to the centre of the room. "Consider the facts that do not fit. Vandenberg was killed between 11:40 and 11:50. Captain Payne was playing baccarat with Mr. Blackstone and Colonel Masterson until 12:20. The Colonel is an old friend of mine. He confirmed the times this morning. Payne could not have been in 2 places at once." Bastien's face had gone the colour of putty. "Then who?" Poirot smiled without humour. "Someone who knew Payne's reputation and used it as camouflage. Someone who planted the cyanide vial and the duplicate key in his cabin while we were all watching the midnight charade in the ballroom. Someone who has been directing this drama from the beginning." He turned suddenly to Mademoiselle Gray, who had just entered carrying a tray of coffee. "Mademoiselle, you told us you saw a man with a red rose on the staircase. Yet when Captain Payne was arrested, he was wearing the same wilted rose he had worn all evening. The fresh one, the one you described, was never found, because you invented it." The tray crashed to the tiles. Coffee and porcelain exploded across the marble. Mademoiselle Gray stood trembling, a trapped bird in mouse-grey wool. I do not lie any more," Poirot said, almost gently. "You loved Captain Payne, yes, but you loved Madame Valois more. For 15 years you have been her shadow, her confidant, her scapegoat, and when the Contessa arrived with her threats of exposure, you saw a way to save your mistress forever." Madame Valois rose, white to the lips. "Antoinette, what is he saying?" Mademoiselle Gray, Antoinette, laughed suddenly, a high cracked sound. "He is saying the truth, madame. I killed Vandenberg. I typed the letters. I left the rose, the ribbon, the dagger, all of it." She turned to Poirot, eyes blazing. "You want to know why? Because Vandenberg recognized madame in the dining room the first night. He remembered 1919. He remembered Claire de Montfort drowning herself because of what madame did. He came to me yesterday morning and offered to sell his silence for the Valois sapphires. I refused. He laughed and said he would go to the newspapers. So I invited him to the suite for a drink after the fireworks. I poured Geneva and added a few drops from the bottle Madame keeps for her migraines. Madame Valois made a small animal sound of horror. Mademoiselle Gray ignored her. He drank, he choked, he died. I opened the casket, took the star, scattered the rest to make it look like robbery. Then I pinned the note I had already prepared. I knew everyone would blame the Contessa, or Payne, or Sir Henry. Anyone but me. I am invisible. I have always been invisible. She looked at Madame Valois with sudden terrible tenderness. I did it for you, Veronique, so no one would ever hurt you again. Silence rang like a bell. The Contessa stood slowly. Tears cut clean paths through the powder on her cheeks. "You foolish child," she whispered. "Claire would have hated this." Mademoiselle Gray's face crumpled. She sank to her knees among the broken coffee cups. Poirot signalled to Bastien. The inspector moved forward, almost reluctantly, and helped the sobbing woman to her feet. As she was led away, she looked back once at Madame Valois. "I only wanted you to be safe," she said, and the doors closed behind her. Madame Valois remained standing a long moment, then walked to the French windows and stared out at the glittering sea. No one dared approach her. Poirot gathered the scattered pieces of porcelain with strangely gentle fingers. Bastien cleared his throat. "And Payne?" "Release him with apologies and a train ticket to anywhere but here. He has suffered enough for one lifetime." The inspector hesitated. "But the sapphire?" Poirot opened his hand. The star of the East lay on his palm, cold and perfect. "Is here. Mademoiselle Gray had hidden it inside the lining of Madame's jewel case. She intended to return it once the scandal died down. An act of love, you see, even in murder." He closed his fist around the stone. "Return it to the insurance company with my compliments, and tell them Hercule Poirot advises stronger safes." Outside, the sun climbed higher, turning the sea to molten gold. Inside the winter garden, the white lilies drooped, suddenly funereal. Poirot looked around at the stunned faces and spoke almost to himself. "Love and hate, so often they wear the same face. One kills to protect, another to avenge, and in the end, both destroy what they most wish to save." He bowed slightly to the room. "And now, if you will excuse me, I believe my holiday is truly over." He walked out into the blinding light, a small, neat figure against the immensity of sea and sky, carrying in his pocket a sapphire worth a kingdom, and the weight of 2 ruined lives. Behind him, the hotel staff began, quietly, to sweep up the broken porcelain. Chapter 9. The Gathering Storm. The Grand Hotel's Grand Salon had never felt smaller. At 4 o'clock on the afternoon following Mademoiselle Gray's voyage to confession, every surviving principal guest had been summoned. The tall windows were open to the terrace, but no breeze stirred. The air was thick, metallic, waiting for thunder that refused to come. White-gloved waiters moved like ghosts, pouring tea no one drank, offering cakes no one touched. They sat in a rough circle, the way people sit at a funeral when they are not quite sure who is being buried. Poirot stood before the cold marble fireplace, hands clasped behind him, green eyes moving slowly from face to face. Madame Veronique Valois, black veil, black gloves, black ruin. The Contessa di Ferraro, immaculate black silk, ruby burning at her throat like a coal. Sir Henry and Lady Eleanor Marsden, he florid with brandy, she pale with sleeplessness. Mr. Jeremiah P. Blackstone and Miss Daisy, he glowering, she red-eyed. The Abbé Lafarge, rosary clicking softly between thin fingers. Captain Desmond Payne, released that morning, wrist in a sling, lounging in an armchair with the lazy insolence of a man who has nothing left to lose. And Inspector Bastien, stiff in dress uniform, flanked by two gendarmes who looked as though they would rather be anywhere else. Poirot waited until the silence became unbearable. Mesdames et messieurs, he began quietly, yesterday we believed the tragedy concluded. A devoted secretary sacrifices herself for love of her mistress. A convenient, tragic, finished, but Hercule Poirot is never satisfied with convenient. Convenient is the costume murder wears when it wishes to escape unnoticed. A ripple passed through the room. Last night I could not sleep. The little grey cells, they marched and marched, and one fact refused to fall into line. He held up a single sheet of hotel notepaper. This is the confession Mademoiselle Gray signed at dawn. Read it, Inspector. Bastien took the paper and read aloud in his careful baritone. I, Antoinette Gray, confess that I alone murdered Peter Vandenberg on the night of the gala in order to protect Madame Veronique Valois from blackmail. He stopped. His eyebrows rose. Poirot nodded. Continue, please. Bastien turned the page over. It was blank. There is no second page, he said, puzzled. Exactement. The confession is incomplete. Mademoiselle Gray was taken suddenly faint and could not finish. She begged to rest and complete it this afternoon. Yet when the matron looked in on her cell an hour ago... He paused. The silence was absolute. Mademoiselle Gray was gone. The window bars sawn through. A rope of knotted sheets dangling into the courtyard. She has vanished. A collective gasp. Captain Payne gave a low whistle. Well, I'll be damned. Poirot's gaze swept the room. Someone arranged her escape. Someone with money, influence, and access to the police cells. Someone who could not bear to see her hanged for a crime she did not commit alone. He turned to Madame Valois. Madame, you visited the commissariat this morning, did you not? Officially to bring poor Antoinette a few comforts, unofficially to give her the file you used on your manicure, and the promise of a motor launch waiting below the cliffs. Madame Valois' face drained of the last colour. You cannot prove, I do not need to prove. I need only to understand, and I understand this. Antoinette Gray did not act alone. She could not have. Certain details only one other person in this hotel could have supplied. He walked slowly to the centre of the circle. Consider, the murderer knew exactly which glass Vandenberg would drink from. The heavy crystal tumbler with the hotel crest that stood always on his bedside table. The murderer knew he took his Geneva with 2 lumps of sugar, a detail no chambermaid would notice, but a dressmaker's secretary might, because she had ordered the same drink for Madame Valois 100 times. The murderer knew the precise moment Vandenberg would be alone, because the murderer sent him a note, typed of course, asking him to come to Suite 312 to discuss a purchase of sapphires. Madame Valois rose unsteadily. You are inventing... No. Poirot produced a crumpled scrap of paper. This was found in Vandenberg's pocket. The ink had run, but the broken E remains visible. The note is signed VV. The room seemed to tilt. The Contessa laughed once, a sharp, broken sound. So the great Valois finally pays. But Poirot shook his head. "No, Madame la Comtesse. The signature is forged. Observe the flourish beneath the initials. Too flamboyant, too theatrical. Mademoiselle Gray has imitated her mistress's hand many times on labels and letters. She could do it in her sleep." He turned back to Madame Valois. "Antoinette believed she was protecting you. She believed Vandenberg threatened exposure of the 1919 scandal, but he did not. He threatened something far worse. He threatened to expose the truth about your famous sapphires." Madame Valois swayed. Poirot's voice softened, almost sorrowful. "They are paste, are they not? Beautiful paste. The real Valois sapphires were sold in 1923 to pay gambling debts in Deauville. You have worn imitations ever since." Vandenberg, an expert, noticed at once during dinner the first night. He offered to keep silent in exchange for a partnership, or money, or both. Antoinette overheard the conversation in the corridor. She acted to save your name, your empire, your pride. Madame Valois sank back into her chair as though every bone had turned to water. The abbé stopped telling his beads. Sir Henry muttered, "Good God! Poirot was not finished. There is more. The escape this morning was not arranged by you, madame. You lack the ruthlessness. No! Someone else provided the file, the rope, the launch. Someone who also loved Antoinette Gray, in silence, in agony, for years." Every head turned toward the slight figure in black who had not spoken, once. The Abbé Lafarge looked up. His eyes were steady. "Yes," he said simply, "it was I." A stunned hush. "I have known Antoinette since she was a child in the village near Lyon. Her mother was my parishioner. When she went to Paris to work for Madame Valois, I followed to watch over her. I have watched her give everything, her youth, her name, her soul, to a woman who never saw her. When she confessed to me last night in the chapel, broken, begging absolution, I could not let her die for it." He stood small and suddenly dignified. "I arranged the escape. The launch belongs to a fisherman who owes me a debt from the war. She is safe now. Somewhere you will never find her." Inspector Bastien stepped forward, uncertain. Poirot raised a hand. "No, Inspector, let him finish." The abbé smiled, a strange, peaceful smile. "I typed the notes, yes. I left the rose, the ribbon. I even planted the cyanide in Captain Payne's cabin. I wanted the guilt scattered, like seed on stony ground, so no single stalk would grow tall enough to be cut." He looked at Madame Valois. "You will never see Antoinette again. She asked me to tell you that she forgives you, and that she is free." He reached into his cassock and drew out a small revolver. Several people cried out. Poirot did not move. The abbé placed the barrel beneath his chin. "Mon père," Poirot began, but the priest shook his head. "Some debts can only be paid in full." The shot was astonishingly small in the glass-walled room. He fell forward across the tea-table, blood spreading like dark petals across the white cloth. For a long moment, no one breathed. Then chaos. Women screaming, men shouting, Bastien barking orders. Poirot stood motionless, watching the blood reach the edge of the table and begin to drip, drip, drip onto the marble floor. Outside, thunder finally broke, sudden and tremendous, as though the sky itself had been holding its breath. Rain lashed the glass roof in fury. Poirot looked at the circle of shocked, shattered faces, and spoke so only they could hear. 3 lives destroyed to protect a lie about jewels that were never real. Remember this, mes amis, when you next admire a woman's necklace, or a woman's reputation. He turned and walked out into the storm, coat collar high, hat brim dripping, a small black figure swallowed almost instantly by the streaming terraces. Behind him, the Grand Hotel's beautiful facade seemed to sag, suddenly tired, suddenly old. In the salon, the blood kept dripping. And somewhere far out at sea, a small motor launch headed south under darkening skies, carrying a grey-clad woman who would never look back. Chapter 10. The Final Revelation. The storm passed as quickly as it had come. By 7 o'clock the sky was rinsed clean, the colour of mother of pearl. The terraces steamed gently in the last rays of sun. From the open windows of the Grand Hotel drifted the hesitant, almost apologetic notes of the orchestra rehearsing a slow waltz, as though music itself were asking permission to exist again. Hercule Poirot stood alone on the highest balcony, the one that looked straight down the cliff to the sea. He wore his travelling coat and carried his small valise. The Sud Express for Paris left in 40 minutes. The same liveried automobile that had brought him waited below. He had said no goodbyes. There was nothing left to say. Yet one duty remained. He drew from his pocket 3 objects and laid them side by side on the balustrade. The Star of the East sapphire, returned that afternoon by the insurance company with effusive thanks, a single sheet of hotel notepaper. Much folded a tiny mother-of-pearl crucifix that had fallen from the abbé's rosary when he died. Poirot contemplated them for a long time. Footsteps sounded behind him. Soft, uncertain. He did not turn. "I thought I would find you here," said Madame Véronique Valois. Her voice was hoarse, almost unrecognizable. She had removed the black veil. Without it, she looked smaller, older, stripped of every artifice. Poirot inclined his head but kept his gaze on the sea. "You are leaving?" she asked. "This evening," a pause. "I came to thank you," she said with difficulty, "and to ask whether you will expose me. The sapphires, the forgery, everything." Poirot turned then. The westering light caught the extraordinary green of his eyes. "Madame, the world already believes the Valois sapphires to be paste. By tomorrow, every newspaper from Paris to New York will print the story. Your empire of illusion is finished. Is that not punishment enough?" She flinched as though he had struck her. "And Antoinette," she whispered. "Antoinette Grey no longer exists. A new name, a new country, a small house with lemon trees, thanks to the abbé's savings and a certain Armenian moneylender who discovered religion this morning. She will live. Whether she will forgive herself is another question." Madame Valois closed her eyes. "I treated her like a piece of furniture," she said, "useful, silent, invisible, and she gave me her life." Poirot's voice softened, but only a little. "Love that demands the beloved's destruction is not love, madame. It is possession wearing love's face." She opened her eyes again. They were dry now. The tears had all been spent. "What will you do?" he asked. She gave a small, broken laugh. "Close the house in Paris, sell what remains, perhaps go to Argentina. There is a designer in Buenos Aires who once worked for me. She is young, she still believes beauty can be honest." A pause. Perhaps she is right. Poirot nodded once, as though a contract had been signed. From his pocket, he took the folded sheet of hotel notepaper and handed it to her. She opened it with trembling fingers. It was the second page of Antoinette Grey's confession, the page that had never been written in the police station. The handwriting was neat, hurried, unmistakably Antoinette's. "Véronique, by the time you read this, I will be gone. Do not look for me. I took nothing but the clothes I wore the day I first came to you, 20 years ago, carrying a cardboard suitcase and too much hope. You gave me a life I could never have dreamed. I repaid you with lies, theft and murder. The books were always balanced. I simply refused to see it. Live whatever years remain to you without mirrors. That is my only wish. Forgive me if you can. I remain, in spite of everything, your Antoinette." A single tear, the first Poirot had ever seen her shed, fell onto the page and blotted the signature. Madame Valois folded the letter carefully, placed it inside her glove, and looked at Poirot. "Will you keep the sapphire?" she asked suddenly. He smiled, the small, sad smile of a man who has seen too many endings. "No, madame, I have no need of cold stars." He picked up the gem, weighed it in his palm once, then with a sudden, almost violent gesture, hurled it far out over the balcony. It flashed once in the sunset, an arrow of blue fire, then vanished into the sea 200 feet below. Madame Valois gasped. Poirot brushed his hands together as though ridding them of dust. "Now it belongs to no one," he said, "and therefore to everyone." He lifted the little crucifix, kissed it briefly, and laid it on the balustrade. "For the abbé," he explained, "he believed in redemption. Let the gulls carry his prayers." Far below, the automobile horn sounded discreetly. Poirot picked up his valise. Madame Valois made a small movement, as though to touch his sleeve, then let her hand fall. "Monsieur Poirot, was there ever a moment when you enjoyed your holiday?" He considered, head tilted. "Yes," he said at last, "for exactly 7 minutes on the first morning before I noticed the people." She almost smiled. Then he bowed, formal, impeccable, and walked away down the long terrace. His footsteps echoed once, twice, and were gone. Madame Valois remained on the balcony until the automobile disappeared around the bend of the corniche. Only then did she allow herself to look at the place where the sapphire had lain. The stone was gone, but the sunset light still caught on something small and bright. A single tear-shaped diamond earring she had not realized she had lost. She picked it up, held it to the dying light, and for the first time in 30 years wept without calculation. Far out at sea, a yacht raised white sails and headed south, carrying a woman in a grey dress, who stood at the rail watching the coast of France shrink to a thin golden line. In the chapel of the Grand Hotel, a novice lit candles for the soul of a priest who had broken his vows in order to keep a greater one. And on the express thundering north through the night, Hercule Poirot sat alone in his compartment, eyes closed, moustache perfect, dreaming not of murder or jewels or ruined reputations, but of a small café in Brussels, where the coffee was strong and no one had ever heard his name. When the train reached Paris at dawn, he stepped onto the platform, breathed the cool grey air, and murmured to the empty morning, "Home at last. Order and method have triumphed, and yet he permitted himself the ghost of a sigh. The human heart remains magnificently disorderly." Then he straightened his Homburg, signalled a taxi, and was swallowed by the waking city. Behind him, on the seat he had vacated, lay a single red rose, fresh, perfect, thornless. No one ever knew where it had come from.